Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Future of Monitoring Compliance, Implications and Technology, presented by Medidata. I'm Joe Keenan, contributing editor for Fierce Markets, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speakers today are Dan O'Connell, Principal Platform Adoption, Medidata, Lori Convey, Principal Platform Adoption, RBM, Medidata, Micheles Stump, Senior Engagement Consultant, Medidata, and Chris Burke, Solution Consultant, Medidata. You can read their full bios on the right side of your window. Before we begin, we just have a few technical notes I'd like to go over. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help button at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. We will follow the presentations with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Q&A button on the left side of your screen. You can do that throughout the presentation. That pretty much covers it. I think we're ready to begin. Dan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. I'm going to get things kicked off for us today. Just a little more background on the folks that we've got on our panel here from Medidata. So myself, Dan O'Connell, I'm responsible for the Strategic Monitoring Suite, along with my colleague, Lori Convey. She's a director in our Strategic Monitoring team. Lori comes from 20 years of industry in ClinOps and was a very active participant in the Transcelerate initiative around RBM, specifically around how they came to development of the RAC, the risk assessment tool, which she'll be sharing with us today. Also, Micheles Stump, she is part of our strategic consulting team at Medidata. So Michele's team works directly with our customers on strategizing and learning from the customer as to what their needs and wants are and their future goals, and then works with them on developing the best plan and path forward on implementing these tools to realize those benefits and those successes within their organization. So she's going to have some real-life examples for us today on how she's worked with customers to actually realize those goals. And we have Chris Burke from our Solution Consultant team. So Chris is our technical expert. He'll be supporting us today as we walk you through the solutions that Medidata is bringing forward with our Strategic Monitoring Suite, and he can speak to the actual functionality and capabilities within those products. So that is our panel for today. As Joe indicated, anytime during the course of today, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. But we do have a lot of interesting content to get to, so we're going to move forward and do some level set on folks that maybe are not quite as familiar with Medidata. We've been around for quite some time, obviously born out of the Rave product, but expanding our product offering to our customers and to the industry every year. And basically, using our 800 customers and our 12,000 studies of history here to learn from customers, understand what their needs are, and understand where they want to take their organization, and then finding solutions for them in our product suite. And so with each new product, we are building out out solutions and building it off of the needs of our customers. At the same time, we're building out a wealth of data assets. And really the significance here is we've got all this data from all these studies that we've done, and then we can use that data to really pressure test these solutions before they go to customers, right? So this product suite today that we're talking about has a major launch this month around strategic monitoring, and this product has been through that pressure testing around, are we achieving the goals that our customers asked for when we had this tool and this process in mind? So as we move forward, I'll take you through the agenda and the expectations for today. The way this session will work is Lori's going to start us off with kind of a level set on the latest and the overview of the ICGC revision. And then we'll move into some more specifics around product and process as we talk about protocol review and the risk assessment solution that we've built out at Medidata. That will also include a product demo of that risk assessment tool. Then we'll move into the concept of centralized monitoring. What does that mean? What does it mean today in the industry? And what are the tools that we can offer you to support that, including, again, another demo of our centralized statistical analytics tool to support those needs within our customers. And then lastly, what does this mean? The new risk assessment requirements, the new centralized monitoring capabilities, how does that affect what we've been doing as monitors? I was a CRA for 10 years, and it's a whole different environment out there now with the benefits and the solutions that we've got available to support us. And basically, are we having a problem with sound? Basically, we want to show you how those, okay, I'm seeing the chat, how those technologies and how those solutions and those changes are going to support monitoring into the future. So I'd like to get us started into the content now, and I'm going to hand things off to Lori to kick us off with the ICGC 6 overview.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. And so let me just start out by talking about, I think a greatly anticipated event, the ratification of the ICGC PE6 Addendum. And basically now what we know is that, in fact, a risk-based approach is no longer optional. We all were involved and tried to follow the FDA guidance as well as EMA, which was then taken by Transcelerate and created some sort of a guidance document for everyone. But now that we have E6, it's very clear what we're all responsible to do. And that's based on the fact that we simply have to take that guidance and institute the types of activities that are prescribed. So it's things like the risk assessment, the central monitoring component, the way you actually look at data on an ongoing basis. So this really has the potential to change dramatically the way clinical trials are monitored. And in fact, that hasn't changed for over 20 years. So in fact, we're really glad that this has come about. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about de-risking your protocol. And what we mean when we talk about that, let's first of all just go back to the Transcelerate guidance and look at what Transcelerate told us about, what we knew about the risk assessment document. We created that risk assessment categorization tool and made it available to everyone out in industry. And so some clarifications around that and what Transcelerate actually published after the RACT was out there and being utilized. What was said is that the RACT really is not the Holy Grail. In fact, it was created so that there could be a more consistent approach to looking at risks, to identifying how and by which function those risks should be managed, by identifying and documenting risk mitigations as appropriate, by categorizing risks such as high, medium, or low, and delineating an overall risk for the trial, and giving guidance on how to determine a baseline level of monitoring activity. And they gave some suggestions for source data verification and source document review activities. But what they really said about the RACT once it was put into practice was that it really, we proved it needs to be a cross-functional activity. This, it could be owned by various portions of an organization, but in fact, you need to include all of the key players who will be monitoring the clinical trial, including people like data management, like safety, like those who are managing IP, et cetera. It's also really essential to have somebody to facilitate the risk assessment process who understands the overall process of a clinical trial, who's got clinical trial background, and who knows how to run those types of discussions. And then the last thing they said about it was that the timing of the risk assessments is really critical. It's important when you're in the protocol development phase to begin your risk assessment so that you can apply and be able to de-risk your protocol by potentially looking at what's going on with that trial and being able to decrease the amount of risk within it. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes now and talk with one of my colleagues, Micheles Background, about some of the things that she's learned as she's been working with customers to try and drive a risk-based approach. So if we could start out, I'd like you to, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind just telling our audience a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Lori, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here today. I actually started in the industry about 18 years ago and have worked in large pharma and CRO, starting in data management, clinical monitoring, and ClinOps, and then moved into leadership and alliance management, and most recently had made the transition into technology and came from the CRO space where I led the external apps organization for a large central lab. And that was the team of product owners who determined the strategy and roadmap, user support, business implementation for products. And it was a great role. We had a great vision and very talented team. But we also were a CRO and not positioned to fully leverage the full spectrum of data assets that exist in the space today. And technology wasn't our sole reason for existing, so investment decisions, of course, by nature had to be shared with other competing priorities. So Medidata and the next generation platform is actually the reason I left that role I loved and came to Medidata. We're doing something pretty exciting here in the first of a kind way, and I'm really excited that you're all here and getting to learn about it and look forward to seeing it evolve. I'm pretty passionate about it, Lori.
Yeah, so actually, that's a great background. Thank you for that. And so we know from talking to many of our customers that, in fact, they're struggling to get started. So what kind of advice could you give them when they're just getting started with a risk-based approach?
Yeah, I think probably first and foremost is to work in phases. So don't underestimate the importance and magnitude of the change by trying to do too much at once. Also, don't shortchange or undervalue the criticality of a thoughtful and comprehensive change management approach. And then think about your resourcing and how you'll accomplish this decision-making organization of what your approach is, and consider who those resources are to involve and really allow them to be dedicated to managing that change versus making it a second job for them. I'd say most important is stay focused on the end game. So any kind of transformational change, like a move from traditional trial management to a risk-based monitoring or strategic monitoring approach, means there's some temporary disruption. But at the end of the day, your end game is going to be better trial outcomes, significant downstream efficiency, and it also positions you for future capabilities and leveraging data and assets and solutions that don't exist yet today but are evolving and coming into the marketplace. So really think in phases, focus on those elements.
So when you're having those conversations, I mean, what are the biggest pain points that you see with our customers as they're implementing a risk-based approach?
I'd say first is difficulty stepping out of their comfort zone. It's not an easy place to be. We've gotten very good at what we do in this industry, and we've honed our processes and our procedures. And we've done that in a very functional way, so we've focused those processes and procedures on certain functions. So it's difficult to step out of the comfort zone of those and move from a fully kind of standardized, functionally focused model into a more holistic trial and management approach, where you talked about working cross-functionally as some of the lessons learned from Transcelerate. That takes some time to get used to. The other key struggle is they're not really it's not always comfortable or sure how to make room in the organization for change, and so we generally recommend again that it be very thoughtful and implemented in phases. Get started and refine from there. And then instead of trying to bring an entire organization up on a whole new process and technologies and tools all at once, really take a small group of individuals who will focus on defining a new way of working. They'll be efficient in doing that implement that on some new studies, and then once those new studies are working in the new model, then start looking at how to bring over existing work or broaden and scale some of that change within the organization. And then finally, I'd recommend bringing in expertise to help depending on the profile of your organization. So folks who can help you align around your strategic direction, help you define that incremental path forward, so that you get to that vision. They also can be folks that help supplement resources. So perhaps you always want to maintain your brain power within your organization, but if you need, you can bring in folks to help manage the change from a program management perspective or to help lead your change management. Supplement some of those resources so they're not as draining on your daily operations.
So I can imagine you do come across some resistance with implementation. And what are some of the biggest reasons for that resistance?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of it is not being equipped with the right tools to define an operationally efficient way of implementing a new methodology. So either trying to do too much with too little, meaning perhaps we're trying to take on bigger change than what our tools and processes support or our resourcing support. So making sure we have the right level of information there. And then getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? So change means stepping out of the seemingly known into the unknown. And there's always concerns about disruption. That it's one of the early areas of resistance is what is this going to do to my operation? You don't know me, and this may create a funny picture for you, but I at one time was a runner. I am not an athlete. I have knocked knees. It's not a pretty sight. But I decided I was going to accomplish this, and it wasn't always comfortable. One of my runs, I saw this guy with a fabulous T-shirt that stuck with me since that day many years ago, and the T-shirt was "Pain is weakness leaving the body." And that's really what we have to think about as we run transformational changes within our organization. It may be painful. We have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable for a while, but the payoff in the end is well worth it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So in your experience, that when you're developing those kinds of strategies within both pharma and CROs, what's the range of knowledge and experience that you see?
Yeah, I generally see clients segregate into three categories of change, where they're seeing the change or the kind of change they're wanting to take on. Those looking for just an incremental change, those looking for a more transformational change, and then those looking for disruptive change to their organization. And each are driven by a number of different factors. Some of it is the need to comply with regulation like E6, or they're interested in scientific benefits of analytics or operational efficiency specifically. And then others are really focused on kind of revolutionizing what they do in their trial conduct today. For those clients in that incremental space, I've seen those who have yet to implement a risk-based approach and whose organizations really don't even know what it means or that E6 was amended. So starting very early in the process and very basic, we're doing a lot of early education with them. And then we see clients who certainly are aware of it and are working on adoption, but they're really still quite high level in that adoption, and so they maybe have identified high level risks and key risk indicators for their organizations, but they haven't yet fully migrated into how that translates into a study-focused risk-based approach. So they're kind of moving down the path of understanding and awareness. In the transformational change space, we see clients who've fully implemented the Transcelerate model and the RAC tool and have developed some very elaborate processes and approaches using sophisticated spreadsheets, for example. And they may have brought in some good standalone technologies for study management or analytics, but they're still constrained by the limits of those tools and solutions because they require a significant amount of overhead to maintain them, and they don't quite bring the operational efficiency or visibility they need to get the full benefit of an analytics solution, for example, driven by machine learning, that kind of thing. And then finally, in the disruptive space, we have clients who fully embrace not only their understanding of E6 and regulations and risk-based monitoring, but are wanting to leapfrog into technology that'll drive integrated insights and workflows. So those are clients that have gone all in with us at Medidata to build the strategic monitoring solution, which is the first comprehensive suite of capabilities. And really that is to combine risk assessment and KRI definition with anomaly detection using their trial data, which is available as soon as it's ingested, with centralized issue management and functional plan updates, site management capabilities, that kind of thing.
Great, thanks so much. So just to kind of summarize a little bit what we're doing here at Medidata, we've taken the foundation of the Transcelerate risk assessment categorization tool, and we've created what we call a risk assessment and planning solution. And we're going to show you that via a demonstration of that system. But basically what we do, in a nutshell, is assess the protocol risks and to help to define the impact, probability, and detectability of those study risks as they've been defined. Drive that into the tools that help you to define your source document verification and source doc review. And that really gives you the ability to track on the critical data and critical processes, all of that being linked to a key risk indicator library. You can pull from a library, you can create new key risk indicators, and that's really, also what helps you to determine who's following those risks, to assign workflows as those risks either escalate or de-escalate, and all of that being documented in a platform-based integrated risk management plan. So we want to give you just a short demonstration of what the RAP system actually looks like.
Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the risk assessment itself. And what you're looking at on the screen right now is the overview page of a risk assessment that I've already started. We can see the name of the study. This is just a demo study that I've started already, and we can see that this particular risk assessment is in progress. You can also see that I've assigned 3 different approvers, and they're responsible for approving the different sections of the risk assessment that I'm going to be completing, the risk assessment itself, as well as the KRIs and the critical study procedures for my study. And ultimately, what I'm going to do is work through each of these sections until they're all completely completed. Now, within the risk assessment section, we'll see the total risk score for our study at 0.96. This is not completed yet. And I can tell it's not completed by this status bar. Let me know that I'm around 17% of the way through. So what I need to do is work through each of my categories and subcategories until I've completed all the information and our status bar reaches 100%. Now, each of these categories and subcategories are completely configurable. So you can build and create your own list of these that are appropriate for your own studies and then populate those for each of the risk assessments that you're going to be completing. Now, just for this example, I've actually pre-completed one, but if we have a look at our severity of disease or condition, and we scroll down to the risk description, what we can see is that we would normally start by filling in the risk description. And what we can see here is that I've entered one in that patients with drug-related SAEs must be removed from the study or down titrated on their meds. I've marked this as a compound risk, and if I just take that one off, you can see that, again, completely configurable, but we can start to define what our risk types are. So is it a compound risk? Is it an indication or therapeutic area risk? That type of thing. We can also then start to identify our critical study procedures and processes, as well as our critical data. And above, this is really where we start to categorize and score our risk. So here, we would define what the impact is. So if it happens, how severe it will be. Well, it's a serious adverse event, so that'll be high. If it happens, how likely is it going to be that it happens? Well, the probability that this will happen is, again, high because we've identified that this is likely. And the undetectability is really the detectability. So if it happens, are we going to know that it's happened? We use undetectability so that we can maintain consistency with our scoring. Something that is highly undetectable is high risk. So something that's low undetectability is relatively easy to detect. And then our risk score justification is filled out just to outline exactly why we've made the choices that we've made. Underneath this, we then have the prevention control measures. So what are we going to try and do to mitigate this risk? And if we identify that it's happened, what actions are we going to perform? So in this case, we're going to perform some site training on the SAE reporting requirements and reporting procedures. And we would outline exactly which functional plan has been impacted as a result of this, as well as associated KRIs, so that we know what it is that we're going to be using to monitor or track on this particular risk. Once done, we hit save, the system will update, and the subcategory you can see is updated successfully, and this will sort of move us along on our progress bar. The idea being that we would complete all of our categories and subcategories until that is completed. Once done, we would move on to our key risk indicators section, and again, you can draw down from a list of KRIs that you have set up. Just for this example, let's have a look at the rate of discontinuation due to serious adverse events. And what we can actually do is define and identify the data set that the information is going to be coming from. And we can start to associate this with thresholds. So, for example, if we were to say we had greater than 10 discontinuations due to serious adverse events, we could get the system to automatically start to create and perform some actions for us. So the system could be set to automatically create an issue, automatically create an interim monitoring visit, automatically just create and issue, contact the sites, adjust SDV plans. This kind of activity can be performed. And so we could do something like create an issue, and then we could assign this to an assignee. So we could pick from a list of assignees that we have set up for this study and say, if we have a breach of, let's say, 10 serious adverse events or discontinuations due to serious adverse events, we're going to automatically create an issue and assign that to someone like our central monitor, who's then going to review that information before making a decision on how best to proceed moving forward. So we can set up our KRIs to help us manage our thresholds. And then finally, we have the study procedures section, and this is where we're really going to identify our kind of critical procedures, and we can start to look at what our critical procedures might be. I mean, these perhaps aren't the best examples, but the idea here is that you can set your baseline document.
Hopefully everyone was able to hear the full demo. We're going to move forward now, continue kind of telling the story here of where do we take things from here. Got a lot of background, great information from Michelle and Lori. So we're going to follow kind of this pathway of starting with that risk assessment, and that the demo will be a kind of a continual flow of how we manage things in the system of the tools that we've got. But we always, before each demo, we want to kind of speak to the rationale and the goals that we're trying to accomplish with that. So next, we're going to move into centralized monitoring. Basically, trying to explain and talk to now how monitoring has changed so much. Our industry is not the only thing changing. The world around us is changing. There's just an enormous amount of data out there with wearables and remote devices and different ways to pull data and analyze patients and so forth, that the wealth of data available to us has just grown exponentially. And with that, we've been trying to find better ways to capture that data to give our study teams a more holistic view of the data and the status of their studies. So with that, and with the solutions that we've got that are expanding the ability to create visibility and intake of data, we're also trying to break down those silos. Data management and clinical monitoring have kind of had these separated silos for years in our industry. And we're starting to see that with the increased availability of data, there's a lot more overlap and cross-functionality available and really necessary to do these jobs appropriately. So moving forward with the concept of centralized monitoring, Medidata has built out a product called Centralized Statistical Analytics. And basically what this does is it takes all the possible data that you have for your trial, all different file formats, anything that you want to bring in, lab data, ePro data, whatnot, and it analyzes it in one centralized place, so aggregating all of that together. But what it does differently is that it's not just a tool intended for one group. It's stakeholders across your organization. So we've identified here, obviously, data management and medical monitoring are key components to running a clinical trial. Right in the middle there is our centralized monitoring concept, and we'll talk in a little bit also about the site monitoring. We saw in the demo about developing key risk indicators. So taking that risk assessment information and bringing it into your analytics tool so that you're making more informed and targeted decisions. How do we operationalize that? So if you think about what you know about your study, the known risks that you can build out a KRI for. You say you specifically know that you're interested in looking at EKG data. You obviously want to keep an eye on safety data like adverse events and so forth. And we've been asking the same questions of this data all through clinical research. For the last 10, 15 years, we ask the same 20 questions. What our data sciences team has developed is a concept of letting the data tell you what's going on your study. What if you have something going on with your EKGs, but you didn't think to ask or query the data in that way or build a report that identifies that for you? What CSA does is it takes all of the data and it compares it with all of the other data. So basically, every data point gets compared with every other data point to find those trends and to find those anomalies in the data and the questions that you didn't think to ask. So we refer to these as the known risks, which is extremely important to be in compliance with ICGC 6 and to build out a usable KRI dashboard for your clinical teams. But what about the unknown risks? What about the things going on in your data that you didn't think to ask or you didn't know to look for? And that's what CSA does. And maybe not every signal or every finding will be something that warrants an on-site visit or further root cause analysis. But the idea is that it brings to you the possibility of things that you didn't know about, and then you can move forward with further investigation of that. So what we're going to talk to today is, and what we're going to show you next in the demo, is how we can aggregate that data for you, how we build out the KRIs, and then what can we do from a centralized monitoring perspective? What can we do to look at that data, identify what is qualified as being, let's say, an issue? Everybody kind of has a different term around it, but let's say around issues and actions, the types of things that our CRAs and our monitors have been traditionally responsible for, and showing you how it will enable those CRAs and monitors to take a more targeted approach when we get to the site monitoring component after having the benefit of the more holistic looking information through a tool like CSA. So this next demo will take us into CSA and into our issue management capabilities to show how we can bring this data analysis back into that site monitoring piece to operationalize on the activities of a site monitor.
Okay, so now we're going to have a look at CSA, which is Centralized Statistical Analytics. That's going to allow our central monitors to review the data, review all of their study data from a remote location before raising and finding any issues and actions into the workflow of the monitors to go and resolve or discuss with sites. Now within CSA are a variety of different tools that allow us to identify the unknown risks. It is a statistical review tool, so it can help us to identify any issues we weren't aware of. But it also has a KRI table that allows us to identify and track the known risks. So what we're looking at here is the summary table that you're first taken to when you enter into CSA. And on the left-hand side here, what you can see is a list of all of our sites, as well as a summary of the key risk indicators that are affecting them. We can see red, amber, and KRIs, and we can quickly see a detail of exactly which KRIs are significantly different at this particular site. So here for site 101, we can see they have an adverse event rate, a significant number of concomitant medications, etc. Now this information is being pulled from our KRI table. So if I just open up our KRI table, and we can start to see what this means. Now here what I'm looking at, and this is just for our study, we have around 25 KRIs that have been defined, one of which is the SAE rate per patient year. And this is probably the KRI that we would use to track that, that issue that we identified in our risk assessment a little bit earlier on. And the way that we might want to start using this is we can actually look at both the high and the low number of SAEs. So on the low side might help us to identify where we have an underreporting of serious adverse events, but on the high side where we have a high number of them that we might want to kind of interrogate and understand what the cause is. Now here what I can see is that site 1124 has a red KRI, which means that it's both a high number and is statistically significantly different from our other sites. And it takes into consideration things like the number of patients at the site, as well as the kind of time that subject has been sort of entered into the study, that kind of information. And it returns this reading to us that we know that this is a significant issue that we need to kind of follow up with. We can support key risk indicators by country as well. So in the by country tab, we can actually review the same information to identify that actually Australia as a country is our main cause for concern from an SAE rate perspective. So here I can actually start to look and see that we have a major problem in Australia. And if I wanted to look at the sites within Australia, I can actually use the country filter to hone in specifically on Australia. And now what we see is we have 7 sites, 3 of which have a high number of SAEs that are statistically relevant, but also 1 that has 0. And you can see that there's actually 2 that have 0, but this site here, this bottom one, 114, actually only has 4 subjects. And so although it's got no SAEs reported, statistically the system hasn't expected it to have an SAE reported by now. Whereas this other site, 1035, also has 0 SAEs, but actually because that particular site has 12 subjects, statistically the system expects them to have reported an SAE rate based on what's happening in the rest of the sites in this study. And this might be indicating that we have an underreporting of SAEs, and that might be something that we want to flag an issue against. And so what we would do when we find this kind of information is go to our issue management module and start to open up issues against these findings into our issue management system. And that can be done from within CSA. Now, I've actually created this issue already, and we can see that on the left-hand side, our issues management and our actions tab exist in the same kind of interface that we were looking at for our risk assessment. So if I wanted to drop back into the risk assessment, I can use the quick navigation pane at the top to allow me to do so if I have the permissions. Now within this particular issue, I can capture some baseline information. So here I can see my issue type. This is a non-protocol deviation, but I could equally mark that as a protocol deviation. I can put in the category, which is patient safety, as well as the subcategory. So these are configurable, so you can change the way the issue management structure is defined for your organization to align with your SOPs, but it's going to allow you to capture issues as well as a description of any information that's relevant for the person who's assigned to take resolution against it. So here I have a description. The KRI indicator table has indicated a statistically low number of serious adverse events at this site. I also have a root cause category and a root cause description here. So once I've actually conducted any activities, I can try and identify what the cause of this has been and populate that into the issue as well. Now on the right-hand side, I can see the add action item. So I can very easily add an action that needs to be followed up and assign this to someone to follow up on. Now I've done this already, and you can see underneath that I have the action assigned of review serious adverse events reporting procedures with the site. I can make comments on this if I want to, so I can easily add a comment, and again we can allow different users to perform different tasks in the system, so different users could be allowed to add comments to this particular activity should they want. And I can drill into the action itself, and within the action I can start to define some additional information. Every action is a slave to an issue, and again, if you can see that this has just dropped me down to my actions tab. Within this action, I'm going to review serious adverse event reporting procedures within site. It's a preventative measure, and I've got an additional description. It shows me that this is linked to my specific issue, and it shows me who is assigned to actually complete this task, as well as the status of this action. Now, I can change the status of this action to closed resolved. Let's assume that I've been to site and I've done what I need to do, and I can resolve this particular issue before going back, this action before going back to my specific issue. You can see it's a major issue. I can jump back into my issue. That action has now been closed, so I can either add subsequent actions or actually go ahead and close down this particular issue, and that's part of the workflow of our system. What we'll have a look at next is how we can actually populate this list of issues and actions into the monitoring workflow of our monitors.
Okay, excellent. Hopefully everyone was able to hear and watch the dynamic presentation there of that tool. So as as we move forward, I'd like to take us into the site monitoring component and speak a little bit about, excuse me, how the impact of the risk assessment as well as centralized monitoring, two key components that came out of ICGC are impacting site monitoring and how these things are improving how we move forward in site monitoring. So let's take a step back for a minute and just talk about the end-to-end solution that we're trying to get to. What are we trying to achieve within our clinical studies and from a clinical ops monitoring perspective? We've got the risk assessment here at the left-hand side that we discussed. We've got centralized analytics and a more holistic look at data. And so what does that do for us from a monitoring perspective? We saw in the demo that we've got holistic data. We're looking at things across the board, and then we're identifying potential issues to follow up on. And so what's coming next is, in preparation for an on-site visit, our centralized monitors and our on-site monitors have a collaboration of what's being found in the data before we go out to a visit. And so it's not just about what I'm going to do at the visit, but it's also about where am I going for the visit? Whose sites am I going to visit? Really what we're trying to get at is that this is no longer a one-size-fits-all monitoring strategy, but a more fit-for-purpose monitoring strategy. Where does my study need more attention, at which sites, and what are the things that we need to address at those sites? And this is where the risk assessment, which gives us the prioritization of what are the things that we want to concentrate on, combined with the holistic view of the data of where are those things happening within my study holistically, am I having more problems at one site than another, allows me to then make better and more informed decisions about where I'm sending my resources and what I'm doing with those resources when we get on site. If Dr. Miller in Florida has the highest SAE rate and Dr. Jones in California has the highest screen failure rate, do I want my CRAs having the same conversation with both those investigators when they go out there to make those visits? So this is a more fit for purpose, a more targeted approach to monitoring, and really leveraging the decisions that were made upstream around the risk assessment helps our CRAs to prioritize what are the next steps. So we didn't really speak too much in depth about SDR versus SDV activity, but what we've got within our site monitoring tool, and we'll be able to show you here in the next couple of minutes, is the ability to identify the critical processes, the procedures, not just data that you can find in the case report form, but what's going on, let's say, for informed consent or a drug titration schedule that can be complicated for the sites that you want your CRAs to be spending more time on. And those types of things, that level of detail of specific tasks that you want done can be fed into your site monitoring tool so that your CRAs are actually following suit of what was decided during the risk assessment. So gone are the days, really, where we should be having the same 25 questions in a monitoring visit checklist for every therapeutic area, for every site, for every study. We should be being more dynamic about our approach and what we're asking our CRAs to do. And then finally, in our industry, we know that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So all of this workflow there's full traceability, a full audit trail, all Part 11 compliant, but the beauty is the visibility of that trail of who opened the issue, who took the action items, who followed up, and we'll see that with Chris's third and final demo of the tool. Specifically, with regard to how we envision the site monitoring tool and what it can do for us, improving collaboration and visibility across your organization. So we're bringing in multiple stakeholders, cross-functional teams to collaborate to help drive the time that we spend on site to make better decisions and to be more efficient with what we're doing on site. And then the streamline capability here is where we're using workflow and we're ensuring that the CRAs are maintaining compliance and adherence to the monitoring plan, because it all is driven by the decisions that were made through the risk assessment. And we saw Chris build it out as a KRI, and then we saw the KRI as a finding driven into an issue. And so what we want to show here is how we kind of close the loop on that and finally, turn it into on-site monitoring activities that, again, promote compliance and adherence to your plans and to the regulations. So we're going to move into our demo on site monitoring.
Okay, so the last section that I want to have a look at is our activities by our monitors themselves and how we can take those issues and actions that have been created by our central monitor and assign those to our CRAs to go and resolve and take actions with the site. I want to start by looking at our visit schedules. And what we're looking at on the screen now, it's one of the settings and one of the configuration options within the system. But what it allows you to do is actually define the activities that are going to be included in an interim monitoring visit or site initiation visit or whatever the visit is, but actually use the site risk tier to define what the scheduled frequency of visits is going to be. So in this instance, we're looking at a medium risk tier site, and we're using our site start date as our trigger, and essentially saying that as the primary assignee, and again, we could change our assignees if we wanted to, but as the primary assignee for this particular visit, I am going to be looking to set these every 20 days until the end of my study, allowing me to conduct my visit plus or minus every 5 days. And what this gives you the flexibility to do is actually change and define a different monitoring frequency for individual risk tiers. So if I had a low risk site, I might go every 30 days. If I had a high risk site, I might go every 10 days, or whatever is appropriate for your study. And so I can change the risk tier of my site to then define what the frequency of visits is going to be and truly realize some of the benefits of a risk-based monitoring approach, because as we drive our sites towards a low risk tier, we can extend or reduce the number of monitoring visits that we're conducting at the site and really start to conduct more of these activities remotely, which is beneficial to everybody. Now, the actual visits themselves are managed using the visits section, and you can see the visits tab on the left-hand side here. So all I need to do is go and manage my visits. Now, I have a list of visits that are open across multiple sites that I've been assigned to. And what I might want to do is go and have a look at my specific site that I'm working with today, which is the University College London. I have a variety of interim monitoring visits set up. A couple have been completed, a couple are planned or confirmed. And what I want to have a look at first is one of these confirmed visits, which I can open up. And what I'm looking at is a list of the activities that are going to be required of me during the interim monitoring visit. So here I have to evaluate facility, review IP, review the binder, review subject data, but importantly is this review of the open issues. So this is prompting me as part of my monitoring plan to actually go and review the issues tab and the actions that are open for this particular site. And we'll be asked to confirm that that has been done as part of this process. And in the future, we'll be able to actually populate the list of those issues directly into this section as well. Now, in order to conduct the visit, all I need to do is go up to the Conduct Visit section, click Conduct Visit, and then I can work through all the different questions to make sure that I'm actually completing this visit appropriately. Now, for each one, we have different options that can be set. For example, if I was to state that the site has adequate equipment to complete all study procedures, there are no further options available for me. However, if I was to choose no, the system is automatically flagging this as an issue that I would then need to create into the issue management workflow that would then be tracked, I could track to make sure that I've completed this at subsequent visits. And so the system is very flexible to help me make sure that I'm completing all the activities that are necessary throughout the conduct of my visits.
Excellent.
Now, I'm not going to actually
so we're going to move
everything
to
in the interest of time.
Question and answers section of the webinar, and we do have some questions already coming in. So I will I'll share the questions with the team, and then we can have some responses from our group today. First question came up, I think, while we were going through the earlier demo. At what point in the data accumulation cycle do you feel that these issues become valid for action? So who would like to take that one?
I will take that, Dan. This is Michelle Stump. That's a good question, and a good one to be thinking about in any of your risk-based monitoring approaches, especially using analytics. And what the answer is, unfortunately, not straightforward. It really depends on the trial that you're dealing with and what the flag or the outlier is focused on. So, for example, early in a trial, without having a lot of patients or a lot of sites, operational KRIs are really good to watch very early and begin to action. So I've seen an example of a site that's time to CRF entry was significantly high. And catching that with the first patient through, though it may not be statistically significant in the scope of the whole study or relevant to other sites, for that one site that they're taking 45 days to put their first case report form in is something that you would get early visibility to and want to work immediately with them on making sure they understand the process, don't have issues with access or completion information or delegating tasks at the site. In other cases, there are certainly KRIs where you'll know, based on the nature of the study or the protocol or what the KRI is, if it's something you just want to watch, and you tag that to watch and see how it evolves over time. So the CSA, what it does is allow you to ask better questions. And when you take the better questions and combine it with your knowledge of the protocol and your company's regulations and policies and procedures, you then can make a decision about the timing for what the right action is, who should address it, and what the timing is, and then use the platform to help you enable that. Tag it to watch for future observation, open an issue to action, a workflow to someone to address it, or just know it's okay and not something you're concerned about.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. So continuing, I think, around some CSA questions, how is reporting identified versus underreporting when it comes to SAEs?
Yes, exactly. So in the system, it's very simple. You just sort by, in that same column where there was a KRI, by clicking on the column header, it sorts the high and low reporting. So in the demo, Chris sorted it to the low reporting SAEs or potentially underreporting. Had he clicked that column header, it would have shown all of the high reporting sites at the top. And so you could then very quickly and easily see what sites, and on the other tab, there's an accompanying tab, you could see what countries are over or under reporting as well. And it's something that we've seen examples where sites have misinterpreted the reporting guidelines in the protocol. And while it looked like one was perhaps under-reporting, they were actually reporting correctly while everyone else was over-reporting. And it was very easy to see that because they appeared as outliers, and through simple sorting were there at the top.
Excellent. All right. So let's see. We have more of an implementation type question here, Michelle. So this will probably be coming to you as well. What if a sponsor cannot implement an entire suite of products, such as if some of their solutions are under contract, so they can't take everything all at once? Can this system be implemented in phases, and what would be our recommended approach to that?
Yes, absolutely. We certainly would want to work with you on what your needs are and where you're at. But a very common approach we take is to implement centralized statistical analytics first. So getting the elements in place to get you up and running on those central monitoring aspects, identifying what your standardized key risk indicators are and critical data and processes that we would want to surface in that known risk space, and then what is the data that's using that information, that critical data in the analytics space, so that those unknown risks can surface. And then from there, we can evolve that into down multiple pick-your-own-adventure paths, if anyone remembers those books from childhood. The path could be you take it from centralized monitoring into a data management model where you're looking at how to optimize your data management activities focused on specific data variables. It could go into a medical monitoring space or a full end-to-end analysis space of all of your trial data, more in the biostats area. So those would be options within the CSA space. We also could look at options like beginning to layer in then things like the site monitoring capability and when that timing works. So we certainly would work with you to define the best path forward, but there are avenues and ways to implement that will bring value over time.
Excellent. And so we see here also kind of along those same lines, implementation, it looks like. Are there risks? If so, what are they for using disparate systems when implementing RBM?
Certainly, I'd say probably the number one challenge we see is that it creates quite a bit of operational inefficiency. So if you're trying to juggle getting even things as simple as using a single source for your data, right? If you're having to enter information in a spreadsheet, then in your CTMS, then in your ECRF system, and all of those things, then in your analytics tool, you spend a lot of time entering that information in multiple places, and then managing through handoffs. So looking at different tools and getting findings or observations then in some kind of a process flow to manage the issues, right? So there's certainly value in having an integrated platform that's interoperable, where it's using the same source of data. You're looking at something like your analytics, and you're identifying something that you want the medical monitor to evaluate by opening a quote-unquote issue to them, an action to them to take a look at something, or to the site monitor to do a root cause analysis with the site. There's certainly benefits there. There's also considerations around often what you see with multiple systems is a lot of inherent limits to capability. So you think of something that you need it to do, but you can't get everyone or everything to talk to each other or to enhance in the way you may need to enhance. And so it just applies some inherent limits to the capabilities that you get. And often what you end up doing then is making investments into custom integrations between those systems, and that also adds overhead and time. And in that same vein, when you have all of those kind of interconnected pieces that you've woven together, when there are upgrades to different aspects of your system, your validation effort increases significantly. So it certainly can pose some challenges. In contrast, if you're working in an integrated space, that validation and those upgrade efforts are significantly streamlined.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So I'd like to take this time to thank our team for joining today, and great conversation and very dynamic. I appreciate everybody's contribution. And I think at this point, we'll hand it back to Joe.
All right. Thank you. Great presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this Fierce Markets webinar and submitting so many great questions. Again, I'd like to thank our speakers for participating and Medidata for presenting today's webinar. A reminder, the webinar has been recorded. You will be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.